Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Mohammad Azhar. I'm Brown Community College Associate Professor. I'll be starting the session soon. Let's give it a couple of minutes, 1 minute at least, before everybody join. Okay, so we'll start now. So our topic today is designing accessible cybersecurity curriculum for post-COVID-19. I'm Dr. Mohammad Azhar. I'm from Mohammad Community College. It's part of City University of New York. Um, and I have my co-presenter is Dr. Luiz Perez, and he's a TA specialist for National AIM Center at CAST. And we're collaborating on this project for since last year. So I met Luis in a conference for AT conference, and we had a presentation. We had a presentation about accessibility, and they're talking about how to make the curriculum accessible. So I attended the conference meeting, and I became interested, and I said it's a very important thing to do that make our curriculum accessible. Um, so I think the challenge was that I didn't know how much work involved to make things accessible. When I attended the conference presentation, I realized that it's not that difficult, and it's not too much work if you think about it from the get-go when you're creating curriculum. And accessibility not only help the students who need accessibility, it helps everybody. And we hope to demonstrate you guys, everybody here, um, that information. And I think hopefully you guys also gonna be able to adopt some of the content from here and then make your curriculum accessible. And I think post COVID-19 is more important than ever because we put all our content online. So, and this document needs to be accessible. Cybersecurity curriculum are not easy in general because there are a lot of pictures, a lot of, I guess, screenshot, and then a lot of, icons and stuff like that. So I'll have some example later, and we'll show you an example of that activity. I chose a unplug activity, which doesn't require any computers, and I'll show you that example. And we'll also have a PDF example that how to make that document accessible. So, so the agenda here is what is accessibility, how to design accessible curriculum, how to identify types of curriculum and accessible resources. We're going to discuss also what are the 5 best practices for improving accessibility of a lesson plan, and hands-on demonstration and Q&A. And I hope that at the end of the presentation, we'll have enough information to make your, at least, start making your curriculum accessible. Um, so if you want to grab this slide, you guys can go here. You can, I'm just gonna keep it a moment here. Okay. So I think my first question to you guys is that, what is your reason for joining us today? You can answer A, B, C, D. So I'm new to accessibility, I want to learn more about topic. I have students with disabilities enrolled in my courses and want to learn more how to create accessible content for them. I lead others who develop content, want to provide my team and with tips and resources on accessibility. And yeah, let's take a moment, see what's your interest. Um, yeah, if you click on the Q&A, then you can answer. Cool. So I got C, 1C, C. All right. I got 2C. Anyone else, folks? Okay, it's fine. You can just mention it, so that'll help us understand. Great. Great. Okay. All right. So I got a lot of C's and some 1B and 1D. Okay. Sure. Okay. Great. So that's awesome. Um, so if you look at the the idea here is that any of the category, we're going to try to answer all a question that will be help you to have accessible curriculum. Um, so, so the kind of a origin of the story is that my initial curriculum was in robotics. So I was doing after school robotics curriculum, and this was in high school, and so we had lesson plan that were not accessible. So we went through all the curriculum what we had for the it's like a semester long content for the K-12 robotics in Lego Robot, and we made them accessible. But then I thought about cybersecurity curriculum because that was the next thing when I do in the high school. And so we, in COVID-19, when spring semester happened, in the COVID-19, then we had to move everything online. So I was having after school robotics club um, for the high school I work with, and they were interested about cybersecurity curriculum. So we are working right now on the cybersecurity curriculum, making them accessible. So there are a bunch of challenges. I'm gonna talk about it, what I come across. I'm sure that you probably gonna see the same challenges, um, but main thing is basically that we have to figure out the type of content you want to choose. And to be honest with you, what I found out, the PowerPoint, PDF file, those are not, very accessible, friendly documents. Word document, Microsoft Word is one of the best one out there. They have built-in tools that you can just do a check on accessibility, and then you can make them accessible better. And as I said, you don't write the content first. When you're writing the content, you want to be mindful about accessibility. So if you do that, then and then you do another check, then it become easier to change them. Like for example, when we did our curriculum, we already made the curriculum. So we had to go back and do an accessibility check, and then we went and changed those things, whatever we have to change. So you can save a lot of time if you start building curriculum, keeping accessibility in mind, right? Um, so I have this slide here. I kind of put everything there, the things we usually use. So a lot of us use Lab in Microsoft Word document, and Microsoft Word has accessibility checker. So if you use that one, that's just simple. You can just go and do the checker, and it's just gonna tell you, and suggest you, and then you can make the changes. And then PDF file, Acrobat Reader doesn't have a checker, but if you have the professional um, Adobe Acrobat version, there is accessibility checker. I wouldn't recommend you that Acrobat Reader at all, and you'll see hopefully we have time to demo that. It's not an easy one to do, but I guess if you have a Word document, you did the checker, and then you make the PDF file, and then you want to do another check, and then you kind of see if you have anything missing, then you can add that there. That'll be the option. But if you have an existing PDF file and you try to make it accessible, it becomes challenging problem in general. I use a lot of Google Doc because I do collaborate. So right now in COVID-19, post COVID-19, I work with my students. When I work on the document, I use Google Doc. It's just easy, and I can just go do stuff. Unfortunately, Google Doc doesn't have like a full version of the accessibility. So that there's a software called Grackle you can add as an add-on in the Google Drive. And in that one, you can check, but then it's not the same as Word doc, right? So my suggestion would be you can make the content in Microsoft Word, make it accessible, make sure that you check the accessibility in Microsoft Word, and then move to Google Doc and make the other changes, right? Or however you want. But Microsoft Word probably your best friend when it comes to accessibility checking. Um, and then you have the interactive module, like you have some of the stuff you can think about the screen reader check. So if you have, computing devices, you have the screen reader um, installed, then you can also test with your content with the screen reader. And you can definitely want to check that keyboard accessibility. And virtual lab, you also want to check for the screen reader and keyboard accessibility. So virtual lab, I'm talking about like when you have like a net lab or this online environment. Um, you definitely check that if your student have accessibility, if they can able to use it. Because if they are not accessible friendly, then it's going to be hard for them to kind of navigate around the environment. So I think that basically beg the question that maybe we should also ask our people who develop the content, make this content accessible if they're not. Um, so so the next question I have here is that what does accessibility mean to you? Um, yeah. So okay. So I think the moderator, someone was asking, can we enable the chat, or we should use the Q&A to answer the question? Yeah, I think this is the option for us to communicate. So if you answer your question here, let's see, we have, oh, it is open now. Can you guys try the chat window now, guys? And folks, if you can try answer your question in the chat window, Scott, if you, or so again, this is a question. What does accessibility mean to you? Okay, great. We have, sure. You guys can see making accessible to all students. Great. Great. So you guys can see, I guess, everybody's answer, right? Yeah, excellent. Um, great. Yeah, so my finding is that, I think when you make the document accessible, you make it accessible for everybody, including folks who needs accessibility, but because you make your document much presentable, I think, because you're being mindful about how you were saying this stuff. Um, so right here, yeah, thank you for your input right there. So I have here a little definition of accessibility right here. Okay, a person with disability can incur the same information, engage in the same interaction, enjoy the same services. Right. So here, you're equally effective, equally integrated with sustainability equivalent, ease of use, and as a person with a disability. So basically, we want to give them the same access, right? Same equal participation, right? Engagement, and they can have fun. So when you don't make our document accessible, that becomes difficult for them to navigate. Um, I guess um, in the pre-COVID world, I know that in my classroom, I used to have someone. Um, used to come along with the student who need accessibility, who can take notes and stuff like that, right? So in the post-COVID world, it's more difficult, I guess. So we need to be just mindful about that. Um, so this is a nice slide, kind of shows you accessibility and universities for learning. So you guys can see here the purpose of education not to make information accessible, but rather to make teach learner how to transform accessible information into visible knowledge. And there's a slide here for universal design language, right? This is languages for learning, so you can look into that. And it has like all these different things about engagement, representation, action, and expression. Um,
Hi, Dr. Azhar. I just want to let you know that I'm here.
oh, great. Welcome. So this is Dr. Luiz Perez. So he is my co-presenter. You came in the right time. So this is your department. I'd like to take it away. So I can just press enter, and you tell me. I can just control. Or you want to? You know what? Maybe it's better that you share the screen.
Yeah, let me do that. I will.
Yeah.
Go ahead and let's see if I can get permission here.
Yeah.
Yep, you should be able to see my screen in just a second.
Okay.
I was double booked here, so it'll take a second for my slides to come up. But while they do that, I will just do a quick introduction. So I am Luiz Perez. I'm a technical assistance specialist with the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials at CAST. And CAST is the organization that started the Universal Design for Learning movement in education, which is, the goal is to really make education more inclusive, more accessible for all learners. And part of that is making sure that materials and methods and technologies are accessible to everyone, and that everyone can participate. So let me just find the slides. There we go. I knew I downloaded them earlier, so it'll just take me a second to get them up and running. And then we would talk about accessibility and how it applies to cybersecurity curriculum. All right, so let's see. We are.
So what is AEM? I think to start from there, right?
Yep.
That one. I think that one right there.
Yep. Perfect. And actually, I want to go back to the previous slide, just to add a little bit to that. So the reason why I chose this quote here is that when we think about accessibility, we also need to think about engagement, right? So one of my mentors uses this quote or share this quote with me at a presentation. He said, we want to make sure that we're not providing access to boredom. So that's David Rose, who was the originator of UDL, said that in a presentation. And it's always stuck with me because when we think about making materials accessible, we also want to think about how do those materials engage learners? How do they challenge learners? Because that's important as well. So it's not accessibility. It's not the end, and the be all by itself. It's just an entry point that then allows learners to do more with the material. So we consider accessibility as an essential component of universal design for learning, but it's not, it's just one component of UDL. It's not all of it. So again, UDL stands for Universal Design for Learning, and it's a framework for designing inclusive learning environments based on the idea that we all vary, we all bring variability to the learning task. And so we need to provide options for our learners are engaged, how they access the information, and then how they show their understanding. So today we're going to focus on, just the materials part of it. But again, it's part of a broader concept of inclusive learning design. And we're going to share a few tips for you for making any materials that you use in a cybersecurity curriculum more accessible and inclusive. So there is a framework that can help us when we think about materials and how accessible they are. And this comes from the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. This is the standards body for the web. So they design standards that help people, create more accessible websites and documents. And they've created a set of accessibility standards. They go by the name Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they get updated every once in a while. They're currently at version 2.1. And so this is the standard for websites, but it also applies to documents like PDF files and Microsoft Word documents and the like. And these standards can be really technical. And so when we work with educators, we try to boil them down to just 4 general principles, which make up a nice acronym, POUR, P-O-U-R. So we want to make sure that the information is perceivable. So people can, get the information, they can make sense of it. It doesn't rely on one sense. So if you can't see it, or if you can't hear it, there's always another option in the form of text transcripts or captions. We want to make sure that the information is operable, meaning that you can navigate independently. And if you can't use the mouse, you can always use the keyboard. So there's flexible navigation, there's options there. Understandable in terms of the language. So if there is jargon, do we provide links to definitions? Do we try to match the language with the audience that we're working with? And then robust, meaning that it works on mobile devices and it works with assistive technology. So have we designed the content to follow best practices so that if a student needs to have the information read aloud because they're blind or they have a visual impairment, they can do that. And there are no barriers that get in the way of that happening. So really those 4 core principles are the foundation of accessibility, if you will, and then we go into more detail with each of them. So for this afternoon, when we're reviewing a curriculum, like a cybersecurity curriculum, we need to start somewhere. So we can't address all of the WCAG principles all at once, or that's going to be a little bit overwhelming. So instead, we can focus on a few high leverage practices, meaning that these are things that are fairly easy to do. They're light lifts, if you will. They're low hanging fruit. And then when we address them, we have a big impact on the learner experience, the user experience. And so these are 5 that we identified in curriculum that we're going to look at a little bit later that Dr. Azhar and I have worked on that can have a huge impact. So the first one is making sure we have the document marked up with headings and styles. We're using styles properly when we, indicate where a heading is located in the document. Related to that, making sure that we're using real lists. So each of our authoring tools has a list function, usually as a button in the toolbar. So we're using that to create lists as opposed to just typing a dash or an asterisk. Making sure that our hyperlinks are descriptive so that we're not saying click here or just learn more because a screen reader user might be accessing the document as a series of links. There's an option in screen readers where you can just get a list of all the links. And if they all say click here or learn more, then it's going to be really difficult to determine where you want to go. So we want to make sure that instead of saying click here or learn more, we select some text and then make that the hyperlink, some descriptive text. Tables can be a challenge. So we want to make sure that we're specifying each table should have a header row. And so that way, each time the screen reader reads the value of a table cell, it also says the information in the header so that students build that understanding of how the information is organized. And then probably the biggest one, and I've organized these in terms of simplicity to more complexity at the bottom, is the alternative text for images. So if you can't see that image, what is the other option for you to get that information? And so we can provide a text description of the image so that it can be not only read aloud for someone who's blind, but if we're, if it's a complex image, other learners can benefit from it as well, from having that more explicit description of the information. And a lot of these features here, they start out as accessibility features, but they really benefit everybody. They're more universal design, actually, than accessibility. So for instance, if we mark up the headings appropriately, they make the document easier to use for screen reader users. But it also breaks up the content so that it's not as overwhelming to readers. And then it helps show the information, the organization of the content to learners. So it helps them build a mental map of how things are organized, especially when we can create a table of contents from those headings. So I'm just going to go over some of these briefly, and then we're going to do a quick demo where I'm going to show you in a curriculum that we've worked on how we've addressed some of these challenges or these issues. And then also, please feel free to ask questions. So use the chat. Let us know if you have any questions at any point. So the first one, the first topic here is how to mark up a document using section headings, and then making sure that we're using styles for the section headings. So one of the things that I often see in documents is that people will select the text that they want to make into a heading. They'll go up to the toolbar and they'll choose bold and a larger text size. And while that makes it look like a heading, it actually doesn't add the appropriate code in the background so that it functions like one. So it will not work as a heading for people who are navigating using a screen reader and so on. So what we want to do is select some descriptive text, for the section heading, and then go up to the toolbar and choose one of the styles, like heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and so on. And there's several benefits to doing that. One, again, like I said a second ago, that provides in-page navigation for someone who's using a screen reader. So as a screen reader user, which I am one myself, I can press a keyboard shortcut and I can bring up a list of all of the headings on the page. And then I can choose where I want to start reading from that point on based on the headings. So the analogy I would use here is that you're traveling down the highway and you're seeing all these exit markers or these signs for different exits. And then when you get to the exit that you want, where that museum or that restaurant that you're looking for is located, then you sort of veer off to the side and you follow that path. And so that's the same way that a screen reader would navigate. They would bring up a list of all of the headings and then choose where they want to start to read. Because otherwise, the way a screen reader works is that it goes from the top of the document to the bottom, from left to right in a very sequential way. And that takes a lot of time. So a shortcut or a way around that is to bring up a list of the headings and then skip around the document. But like I said, it's helpful for everybody else because it reveals the structure of the information. So you can see the relationships, right, based on the headings and how they're organized, what's most important, what's less important. And then as an author, it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of the design. Because if you mark up all of the sections as heading level 2, and let's say that you change your mind about the color, you don't have to go through every section and do it, several times. You can just go into your preferences for your authoring tool, and you can just choose to make the color and the size different one time, and then that's reflected throughout your document. So it can be really time-saving tool. And once you have these headings created appropriately, you can then automatically create a table of contents from them. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So actually, one way to check your work to make sure that your document is structured correctly is to add a table of contents. And in most authoring tools, that's really easy to do. So for instance, in Microsoft Word, you can go to the References tab in the ribbon. That's that area at the top of the screen where all the options are. And you can choose References and then Insert Table of Contents. And then if your headings have been marked up correctly, they should show up in the table of contents. So I always do that as a check my work kind of step. So I'm going to pause there, see if there are any questions. Dr. Azhar, maybe you can help me out. I can't see the chat right now because I'm in full screen. Actually, I can. I'll bring that up.
There's no question right now. Everybody is okay. But anybody have any question? We can able to address that. Everybody's okay.
And I see someone shared a link for Pete Works. So that is
Yes.
a great website, great resource to check out. So definitely encourage you to visit that. It's one that I visited a number of times myself. So thank you, Scott, for sharing that. So at any point, just share. I can actually see the chat now. So feel free to share your questions or any tips and that you have. That would be helpful as well. So the next tip here, and again, this is not meant to be a comprehensive accessibility tutorial. We're just going over some of the basics here, and then we'll share where you can learn more. I mentioned descriptive hyperlinks. So this is something that I often see where people have used the language, click here several times throughout a document or a website. And so that presents a number of challenges because, like I said, if you bring up a list of all of these links, like I've done here just for illustration purposes, then it's going to be really difficult to determine which one is the appropriate link that I want to follow. So for instance, here, let's say that the prompt is, which of these two links allows you to access a cyber org unit on threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities? So my question to you, would you be able to tell which one it is if you saw it on a list like this, or if you were listening with a screen reader, if the screen reader just said, click here a couple of times? Right, so you would not be able to determine that. So instead, what we want to do in the next example here, now I have made those two links, or the two links that in the previous example just said click here, I've made them more descriptive. I've selected some text, and then I've made that text the hyperlink. So now I can tell here that the second link is the one that I want to follow. That has that cyber.org lesson on threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities, whereas the other link points to an article on Medium on how I lost my $50,000 Twitter username. So the other thing is that, a lot of people, that language of click here, not everyone is clicking anymore. So sometimes people are tapping, or they may be using assistive technology like a switch interface, where they just press a button to advance a cursor on the screen. And so that language of click here made sense a few years ago when most of us were just using a mouse, but now people are using different technologies to access content. And this is another thing that I often see. So I call this the raw URL, right? So it's basically the entire link. And so the link is included in the document like this. It says docs.google.com/document. And then it has a series of randomly generated characters because Google creates these kinds of URLs that are very long in order to make them unique for each document. So a screen reader, the way it would handle this, it may pronounce the first part of the URL. It may say docs.google.com and probably /document because those sound like real words. But after that, it may start reading each of these characters one at a time. So it may say 1 E K J W Q L 6 S D U and so forth, so on and so forth. So that's not a great experience. So instead, what we want to do is, again, select some text and make that the hyperlink so that it's more descriptive. And we want to make links on a page, if they're pointing to different resources, we want to make them unique as well. So again, when someone accesses a list of them, they will make sense on their own. They can stand on their own. So that's the second tip. So the first tip was, making sure the document has a good structure using the section headings, making sure that the section headings are created appropriately using styles, and then making sure we're using descriptive hyperlinks. So let me pause here, see if there are any questions. I think there is one. Is there a good guide on accessibility for educators? Yes, and I'm going to share that towards the end of this presentation. Our website, it's all about this. It's about making educational materials accessible. So that's a good place to start. If you go to aem.cas.org, we'll post that in the chat. There is a section on creating accessible educational materials, and we have an entire section on pour there. So it takes each of those principles and it goes into more detail. How do you do this in Microsoft Word or in Google Docs or whatever authoring tool you're working with? So that is it's a good place to start. There's another question about alternative text. So what I'm going to do is go to the next topic here, because that's addressed in the next topic. So with alternative text, again, that's the description, so that there's an alternative, there's an option for a person who can't see that image. But it's meant to stand for the image if we were to turn off images, which some people do to conserve bandwidth as well. It's not as common for people to do that, but it does happen. And so when that page loads, that text can take the place of the image. And like I said, it can also be that they may not need a screen reader, but they're using text-to-speech because they have a learning difficulty. And so that text-to-speech can also describe the image for them. So it's just meant to be a concise description of the key information conveyed in the image, not the appearance, but really the content that's conveyed by the image. So I like to tell people it's like describing the image to someone over the telephone. So what's important about the image? It's really easy to do in most applications. Typically, you right-click the image and then find the option in the context menu. It's usually called alt text or edit alt text, or there may be an option in the menu bar once you have the image selected that allows you to put in that alternative text. And in fact, I'm going to show you how to do that in Google Docs in just a second, but here's how to do it in Office 365. You right-click the image, you choose edit alt text, and then it gives you a text box where you can put in that description. There's also an option here to mark it as decoration. So if that image is just there for eye candy, it's not essential for understanding, you can check that box. And what that does is it tells the screen reader, skip this image. There's no important information in it. It's just there for decoration. And then in some of the applications now, there's also an option to generate a description automatically using artificial intelligence and machine learning. I caution, though, that it's still a work in progress. So you definitely want to make sure that you go in and you check it to make sure. With simple images, it can do a great job. With some more complex images, it won't. So generally, this might get to your question, Francis, what makes good alternative text? A lot of that is judgment, right? So, and it's one of those things that you get better with it over time. So the first thing is to really understand why you're using that image. What's the purpose for using the image? Then start with a broad overview. So what is the big picture? What's the big trend here? What's the most important information for the learner? And then, depending on your goals, you can focus on some of the details or some of the less important relationships. So you definitely want to start from general to more specific as you describe the image, and then make sure that it's concise. So generally, you want to focus on just 1 or 2 sentences. If you need more than 1 or 2 sentences, then that's a really complicated image. And it's probably then you're looking at providing that description separately, maybe in another part of the document or in another slide if you're talking about a presentation, and then linking to it. So there are some resources. We can share these slides. You should have access to these slides, but WebAIM has a great tutorial on how to do alternative text. They have some examples that you can look at. The W3C has an alt decision tree. So it guides you step by step by asking you some questions so that you can evaluate different images and come up with good descriptions. And then for more complex images, things like diagrams and charts, the Diagram Center has some resources, including some examples that you can take a look at. So what I'm going to do for the next few minutes that we have is I'm going to do a quick demo of how to do this in just one authoring tool, and then see if you have any questions. So I'm going to do it in Google Docs, but like I said, it's very similar. The process is very similar in other applications. So let's take a look here, make sure that I can get into the right document. So this is just an example of a curriculum that we took a look at with Dr. Azhar and his students. And then you can see here the first heading here. Actually, this might be the after one. So let me go to this one here. So this heading at the top has a style of title. And in general, we only want to use title or subtitle on the cover page of a larger work, something like a report or a textbook. Since this is just a single document, what we want to do is make this heading at the top a heading level 1. And I'm not worried too much about the appearance. I can change that later. But I want to make sure that we start this document with a heading level 1. That's just a best practice. Most screen reader users will press a keyboard shortcut, and then they'll skip to the heading level 1 as the start of their document. And then we want to use these in order or in descending order based on the structure of the document. So the next section here, I would probably mark this up as a heading level 2 to indicate this is a major section. And likewise for principles, I would make that a heading level 2. And then I'll probably have to change the appearance as well. So any major section should have heading level 2 as its style. Any subsection within a major section then would have a heading level 3. But I know that this one is still a major section, so I'm going to make that a heading level 2. And based on those headings, we can then build a table of contents like we have done here at the top. And that can provide some really helpful navigation. For the images, really simple. We can right-click the image and choose alt text. And then I think this was one that was generated automatically. And so we want to make sure and come in here and provide a more descriptive information about that image. So it could be something like, I'm just coming up with something on the fly here. So it may not be the best, but I would go back and review it later. So we want it to be concise and really focus on the information that the image conveys, not the appearance. And so here we have, that's the before, we have an after here, just like on a cooking show. And so you can see that now there's a nice structure here. I have all of my sections properly marked up as heading level 2s. So with any of these, I can place the cursor in the text, go up to the toolbar, and I can, there's a pull down menu, and it shows the style that's been applied to that heading. And if I right click the image, I can see that there's alternative text has been added to it. And I think that's it for me. I know that went really fast, but I believe you'll have access to the recording for this session, and we can also share the slides. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions for either one of us, for Dr. Azhar or for myself.
I want to mention over here that the slides, the content of the curriculum I was showing you before was adapted from cyber.com or cyber.org. It's excellent resources if those of you want to use curriculum for high school cybersecurity, you can visit that website, cyber.org.
Absolutely. Let's see, there is a question. When using alternative text, this is from Francis, what is the kind of detail that you need to add? I use alternative text, but it's not clear what right looks like. So I would say, think about, in the old days, we used to say, think of a tweet. So there used to be a limit on Twitter, and it was very short. I know they've expanded the limit in the last few years, but think of a sentence or two. What's the key information that you want to convey? And if you need more, then I would say you're then looking at a long description instead. So that means that the description should be somewhere else in the document, and then you can link to it for people to access. So, or if it's a presentation, you would put a slide at the end with a text description and then link to it from, near the image that you're describing. And the reason for that is that with alternative text, you can't navigate it as easily as you can do other text. It's all or nothing. So when I land on an image, the screen reader starts reading the alt text, and then I can't go by word or by sentence. It just reads the whole thing. And if I start over, I have to listen to it again. So we want to be as concise as possible. Hope that answers your question, Francis. Anybody else have a question in the last minute or so?
I want to add that, Luis, about the question about the picture, right? I think it's a good thing to try working with another person if it's possible. Like you make the description, and then maybe if you're working with the curriculum with another person, ask the person also describe the picture, and then you can merge your answer and put it in the text. Because we just did it earlier today, right, with my students and Luis and I together. And that was the answer we came up with for the alt text. So it's not easy sometimes, I guess, especially for cybersecurity curriculum. It's a challenge.
Yeah, you're going to run across a lot of complex images or things like screenshots, and so you may not be sure what the alternative text is, but you can always, in consultation with each other, you can think it through, you can work it through. So I'm going to share in the chat as a, I guess you can call it a parting gift, is I mentioned our section on the AIM Center website that focuses on poor. And so I'm going to drop that into the chat if I can get to it. I have a visual impairment myself, so. So this is information about poor, and it's going to be in the chat. And we have it on our slides as well, I think. So it's Designing for Accessibility with Poor on the AIM Center website. All right. So that was a quick time together, but again, we hope you found it helpful, and then you can always get in touch with us if you have any follow-up questions after this session.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
The link here, let me just put the link again. This is for our slide, right? So 1 second. It was just before I had it. I'll copy and paste again. Yeah, my recommendation again, if you start with our slide and kind of start doing that, and then go back to the other extensive resources that Luis shared here, I think that'll be a good starting point. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.